This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 201 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm going to keep my introduction short because this is the continuation of episode 200 and it's all about my listeners to celebrate 200 episodes. So episode 201 is a collection of amazing listener stories. So you will meet the listeners who I introduced to you in episode 200 last week again, and I asked them to tell me about a travel story, something that happened to them that was particularly impactful, was an amazing place, was something that they remember, a story they tell over and over. So I have for you today a really interesting collection of stories that are completely wide-ranging, lots of interesting lessons learned, lots of amazing experiences. So without further ado, as they say, our first listener story comes from Lily, and Lily tells me about an amazing experience she had as a teenager.
Probably one of the best trips was a once-in-a-lifetime trip that I did with my school to Indonesia when I was 16. And this was a 2-week trip to stay in a local village and a very remote rainforest camp to monitor biodiversity and to do some volunteer work. It's part of a large volunteer mission. And this was something that I had never thought about doing before, but this opportunity came up and it just seemed absolutely incredible. And it was just so enriching in many, many ways. It was big culture shock, 2 weeks of living in this completely different way of life. We lived in little village huts with families, and then also in this very remote camp, which you had to walk many, many hours through a rainforest with big packs. And we were also warned before hiking there that we were going to be sharing this camp with a bird-eating spider. Which
how big is a bird-eating spider?
Very well with.
Oh my gosh.
More than big enough.
That's terrifying.
It's in the name. I was absolutely terrified. I don't even deal with tiny ones that you find in London. So that was a big shock. The simplicity of the life there and the way of life that we were having to live as well, and the kind of self-confidence boost of going through these challenging times and overcoming fears like that one. I didn't quite go and look at the spider, but I knew it was there. And there's a huge sense of teamwork as well for, looking out for each other. It was a big mix of year groups as well, lots of people I didn't know, and
Fabulous.
You just become so close. And we also all came down with a terrible case of food poisoning.
Oh, no.
About a week and a half in, and it wiped out about 2/3 of us, and does really bring you together if you're stranded a long way from home, all throwing up.
Oh, you poor things.
So that was a big challenge, but yes, stunning places, stunning landscapes, and amazing people as always. I know you talk a lot about meeting locals and how much you get out of those interactions, and trying to learn a bit of the language and just discovering some of these places that no one normally gets to see. So that was a huge life-changing trip for me.
Oh, I bet that sounds really, really special. And I think when you travel around that age, it's even more potentially life-changing, I think. Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. That was a huge part of it because I had just never done anything like it before. And I'm lucky that I've been able to travel quite a lot with my family, but this was very much the first time I had to do kind of a long flight on my own, because I was actually, at the end of the trip, I flew myself to Melbourne to meet the family who were there for the annual family visiting trip. And so much had already gone wrong on the trip, like I mentioned, but then more went wrong on the flight. There was a connecting flight, so the flight to Singapore was so late, and then I got in not really knowing the airport, 16 years old, and just ran through and shouted, the flight to Melbourne, where is it? Got on a little buggy.
It's a big airport, Singapore.
Oh, it's huge, absolutely huge. And I was the last one to get on the flight. Security was empty.
Oh, no.
They told me my bag wasn't going to make it on. And so I got to the other end eventually, to the very shocked faces of my grandparents who saw me, with no bag, absolutely emaciated as well because of all the food poisoning, all the weight I lost.
No. Oh, gosh.
They really got quite shocked.
I bet they were.
But, obviously it's a great story to tell now, but at the time, it was quite challenging.
I went on to ask Lily about some of the impacts that this trip had on her going forward, and she said it definitely had a huge impact on the way she travels and the fact that she likes to travel a lot. And particularly a couple of things that it really got her interested in, nature and hiking and that kind of travel. And my favourite thing, that it got her interested in finding ways to meet the locals when she travels, because, as you know, something that I really love doing. And she talked to me about, learning languages to make sure she could do that, but also just finding ways to meet the locals. Now, my next guest, my next fabulous listener is Jane from here in Perth. And Jane told me about one of her very, very favourite trips, visiting Italy.
Yeah, so I was thinking about all the places because we've been to quite a few, and there was a town in Italy, went to Italy, had the most amazing time. But there's a town, I think it's southeast, not just above the hill bit of Italy, called Matera. I don't know if you've heard of it. No, it's well worth a Google. It's a 2,000-year-old cave town, and it's just stunning. It's all sort of white, not white stone, sort of yellow sandstone town, and it was built. Well, goes back to Paleolithic times, and so it's got a really checkered history. In the 50s, they closed the town because it was the squalor of Europe. They had typhoid and cholera, and they used to have their animals in the caves. They all lived in caves. And then in the 80s, they built a town behind it, like a modern town behind it. But in the 80s, I think they realised that it was actually this amazing gemstone that they needed to sort of build. So they're now building back the town. So all the places, not all of them, there's still quite a few caves there, but a lot of the houses have been built, but to a really high standard. So beautifully, typical Italian tiles and everything is there's beautiful. But we stayed there in a little Airbnb right on the edge of town that looked back on the town, so you can see through. So it's got a huge ravine through it all, and there's caves, old caves on one side, and some of the caves were churches, and some of them were just where people lived. But you can walk into these caves, and there's like artwork that's like 1,000 years old just in the caves.
Oh, wow.
That you can walk into. And it's all little up and down everywhere you go. So you just feel like you're walking back in time. It's just sensational. Apparently they filmed, what's it called? What's that Mel Gibson movie? There's something, Life of Christ or something.
Oh,
there?
yes. Life of Christ, I think so, yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, I know the one you mean, yeah.
There. And I think there's a scene in the new James Bond thing that's happening there. So the new James Bond movie, so my son tells me. But it was just one of those places that, there's not a lot of traffic. They're very tiny little roads. And it's one of those places because it's up and downhill and lots of little alleyways everywhere. You can see where you want to get to. But to try and find it and get to it is really quite difficult. But and underneath the town, there's a huge cistern that was built, massive, great cistern. I don't know how many years ago, hundreds of years ago, for the water supply of the town.
Oh,
so the whole thing's it's just like, having lived in Perth where there's nothing old.
Exactly.
Walking back and feeling like you're walking in, hundreds of years ago, it was just magical. And it's still makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up thinking about it. It's well worth just a Google of the images of the town because it's stunning.
I'm definitely going to have a look as soon as I hang up.
Yeah,
Sounds amazing.
Like rocks. The inside is churches, and it's amazing.
Oh, wow.
Amazing. And I saw a program on it years ago, and it was always like, if we ever go to Italy, I want to go to this town.
Right.
I didn't know where it was.
Didn't matter.
We actually found it and went there, and no regrets. It was amazing.
This sounds like a place I really want to visit, but my favourite bit is the no regrets. I often have these, I don't know, kind of weird or random ideas of places I want to visit or, people I want to see in certain places, and I always, whenever possible, make the effort, off I go, even if it seems a bit random. Whenever I get those hunches, and it seems like Jane had that kind of hunch, it always is worth the trip. So follow those travel hunches, people. Now, my next guest is Anna, and she explains a really incredible experience she had with her children when they were much younger in India.
From an Hindu temple in India. I stand outside with my 2 children, Christian and Maria Luisa. Maria Luisa was 10 years old and Christian 12, and was in 1997. And it was so much of everything outside of this temple. Really, it was peoples, animals, decorated camels, dust, sweat, so much of everything, and sound, noises, and many smiles.
Oh.
And I understood that something was going on, something special, and I wanted to go inside, but I didn't want to be a tourist. And I really remember this feeling of decence. Do you understand? This feeling to interrupt something,
or like decency, like trying
decency. Yes, thank you. And it was one lady smiled to me, and it was like the door opened.
Huh.
I went inside with her and held my children very strong in my hands, and I felt that my children held me so strong, in my hands, and suddenly we were a part of something, a long queue, and I was a little afraid, and but I was there. I was there, and the only language to be spoken was the body language. So we were suddenly a part of a dancing and singing rhythm, and suddenly we were in the front of an altar, and on the floor was an old man sitting there, and he smiled. It was like a guru or something like that, and with body language, I understood that I had to open my hands, and he put a flower in my hand. And so I think what is so special with this story, because I'm so fascinated from the cultural differences, but it's so many cultural similarities. So the feeling to be seen, to be valued, to be included, to participate. So suddenly I was there, and I was a little part of something much bigger than me and much bigger than my children. He smiled, I smiled, my children less. But it was the story of discover a common ground.
Yeah.
Something like that. So this is the story from a Hindu temple, and I don't remember where exactly in India. It was maybe in northern of on the Goa coast, in a little village.
I love Ina's story, and I love the importance of cultural similarities, not just cultural differences. And I really do believe that, the more we travel, the more we realize that really we are all the same. And that's a very special thing to learn, I think. Now, my next listener story comes from Anuj, and he is talking about a very beautiful trip in Guatemala.
So for us, our choice of traveling has always either been nature. So like places like Amazon or, like South America, or we will go to like historical places, like archaeological sites like Egypt and, Jordan and stuff. But so for the place that I really surprised me a lot was the place called Tikal in Guatemala. It's the lost Mayan city. It famously appeared in Star Wars, if you remember, so as a rebel base. And it is quite large. So it covers 500 square kilometers. And it is a rainforest, but there are Mayan ruins as well. So it is amazing because it's very few historical sites where you can actually climb the temples, right? So in pyramids, you can't do anything. You just touch it and come back. But where here, you can actually climb the whole thing. And it is unbelievable where you can see these temples and pyramids in Tikal built 3,000 plus years ago. And it is still standing. So, obviously there is restoration done, but still standing. And it's phenomenal. The place is huge. There's entire city. It's jungle, pretty much. It's jungle, and there's wildlife. So you got birds and monkeys and all sorts of other animals around us. And I think the last bit that I loved it was no souvenir shops. So it's a national park and it's jungle and it has archaeological sites and there is no vendors to haggle. So it was so peaceful. It's so peaceful. It's just an amazing site. That's why it is my favorite site to visit, because it gives me archaeology, history, and bit of mystical stuff as well, because obviously Mayans must be doing all the things. And there is no haggling, there is no noise of people, and there is wildlife. So it's just unbelievable. So that's my favorite site. So we spend about 2 nights in Tikal. So 2 nights, 2 days, and it's quite far from where normal life in Guatemala is. So we reached in the night before, and we were so lucky that we could find a spot in the lodge that is just outside the gates of the Tikal. Normally you have to stay in city. It's about 2 hours drive from city, and you will either have to select sunrise or a sunset. But we were because my planning, I found a spot just outside the gate, so we can just walk to Tikal pretty easily. Wow. And then the hotel offered the sunrise tour, so we're okay, I'm getting it. 3:30 a.m. We got up and we had to run, pretty much run inside the jungle. I don't know how long was it. I think we ran a fast walk about an hour to get to the spot and climbed the whole temple, all in dark. Yeah, there is no sun, obviously sunrise, and all in dark. And we went there and we sat, and we were told not to make everybody was told you cannot make the noise because the jungle is sleeping. And the moment the light started coming up, you could hear it's the jungle noise started happening. So you hear monkeys, you hear birds, you hear, I don't know, other animals. There's probably heaps of other animals there. And because all the humans were concentrated in the place that we were sitting, there's nobody else outside. And we were all quiet because we all wanted to hear it. It is pretty much like a Dolby stereo. So you can hear things from the back everywhere. The whole jungle was waking up with the sun coming out right in front of us. That place, and then the moment the light come up, you see the pyramids. We were in the bird's eye view, so we were at the top of one of the pyramids or one of the temples, and then there are few other temples. So in front of us. And the moment the sun came up, and we see all these different temples popping out, and you have like lush green jungle, and then there's bird noise. So I'm like, I don't know. The words cannot express the stunning thing that was happening around us. And for a change, humans were the quiet ones.
That sounds like a really, really special experience. And it is nice that sometimes the humans are the quiet ones. I completely agree. Now, my next story is from Genevieve from Canada. And she undertook a really spectacularly special and quite adventurous trip. She's quite adventurous by nature, clearly. And this story has really, really intrigued me.
If I'm Canadian and I want to kind of tell people about something that's very special here that I did, I'll say that I did a trip about 5 years ago in a region of Canada called, it's in French, La Basse Côte Nord. So it's the lower North Shore. Okay. And it spans from Quebec, the northern part of the St. Lawrence, over to Labrador. Okay. So the thing that's special about this place is in the summer, it can only be reached by freighter ship. Okay. And there's 10 communities and they're linked by the ship. In the winter, it's linked only by skidoo. So snow machine. So all of these towns are real towns. People live in them. It's not this shtick. This is where people live and live out their entire lives. But the roads are connected by skidoos. So I told you about my bicycle trip 10 years ago that was 12,000 kilometers across Canada. Well, I ended up in Haida Gwaii on that trip where I live now. And also on the trip, I found out about lighthouse keeping and I became a lighthouse keeper. And then I also found out about this place, La Basse Côte Nord, which is La Route Blanche, the white road. So while I was on the freighter ship, I said, oh, you could probably kayak this, talking to some local people on the boat. And they said, yeah. And in the winter, you can skidoo it from town to town. So I said, would you be able to ski this trip, do you think? And they said, well, I don't think anyone's ever done it, or maybe, one or two people have ever done it, but I don't see why not. There's survival shacks every 20 kilometers. So wow. I was like, kept that in my head. And then 6 years later, I decided to do this trip. And so these towns are like 100 people each place. And I just had no information about it other than that ferry trip. It was very hard to find out info, but I said, I want to kind of explore these towns. So how it goes is it's very Canadian. I couldn't think of a more Canadian experience. So you're on your skis. You're doing this trip, meeting people in every community. There's a different language. So it's, one of three languages. So you don't know by the name of the town if it's going to be French, English, or Innu. So Innu is that First Nation there. And so everyone in the town speaks Innu. You go to another town, it's called La Tabatière, which is a French word, but it's pronounced Le Tabatcher, and it's English people. And they're Newfies, and Newfies have a very thick accent. Newfoundland in Canada, so Newfoundland and Labrador is a very unique population in Canada. It's our easternmost province. So you're going from there to from Innu to English to French. Oh my goodness. And it's like you have no idea what to expect. And then you become the celebrity because no one sees anyone from elsewhere, especially on skis. Yeah. And I had a gal from France with me who I couldn't believe joined me. I had never met her before. And I put a post on a local outdoors group page. And she decided to join me last minute and do this trip. But it took 37 days and we were on skis and I think we went 700 kilometers. Oh, wow. And slept every night what I thought would be in a tent, but people were so friendly. And this is what's unique about that place too. People are over the top friendly. Mm. So people would come by on their skidoos, like you'd see one or two people a day, and they would set up a fire and a camp for you up the road, and we would sleep in a cabin or in a tent with some people or whatever. They were just the friendliest people in the world. And we got more and more famous as we went skiing down the place because they started telling people about us coming down the road. So, and I had my dog with me too.
Oh, and a dog.
Yes.
Oh, perfect.
And my dog. And people were bringing dog food and treats and bringing wine, which we'd then have to drink because it would freeze and the bottle would smash. So you have to drink it on the spot. So we were, drunk and or stoned on the entire trip because people would come by. I'm like, I don't smoke weed, but okay. People were so friendly that I suddenly had to partake because I felt like I was insulting them by saying no. So anyway, it was just an amazing trip, incredibly social for what you would think it would be. So that is very unique to Canada. I don't think you could do it many other places.
No.
And it's kind of one of these places that is kind of the last, this is it, like that they're threatening to put a road through there because they want to kind of link up to the rest of the world. So this might be one of the last few years that you can do a trip like that.
What an adventure. Genevieve is definitely more adventurous than me. I would love to visit all those different communities. I love the fact that they all speak a different language and you can't be quite sure what language that's going to be until you get there. But I'm not sure that I'm up for the long skidoo challenge, or skiing challenge, in fact, in Genevieve's case, wasn't it? So I'm not quite sure I'm ready for that. Now, my final guest from the listener stories is Richie. And Richie, like me, taught English in Asia for a while. He was teaching in China. And like me, he also took himself off for adventures on his days off. And this was, let's just say it was an interesting adventure in China.
I did something similar to you, actually. So I think you were teaching in Japan at some point. I went to teach English in China for a year and a half. Yeah, one of my favourite travel memories. It was a couple of months into my stay in China, and I decided to head out on a few days off in I think it was Mid-Autumn Festival, actually, in China. I didn't realise that every person in the country would probably get up and go away somewhere for Mid-Autumn Festival. So I'd been told that the bus... I lived in Chengdu, so kind of, I think it's Western China. It's a large city, but it's somewhere that I've never heard of in the UK before I went. But it's an amazing city, but went out into Kangding, which is in the Tibetan plateau. I was told it was a 6 to 7 hour bus journey. The bus was going, and I, at the time, didn't have an iPhone or even an Android phone. I had a Microsoft phone, which was like a Nokia, basically. And that's fine because I like to just travel, look out of the window, not keen on like watching movies and things like that on the bus. It was just amazing for me to see like life pass by and go through different villages and towns. Anyway, the bus kept going, started climbing up the mountainside. It's getting thinner and thinner. Scary, but amazing views. But then the bus kept coming to a stop, and at first it was a couple of minutes, but the road looked to be jammed on both sides. It started getting dark. Bus was climbing up very slowly, and then at one point it had just stopped for an hour. And it was completely dark at that time, and they just opened the bus doors and said, you can have a wander outside. Everybody else on the bus was prepared, and they had books and iPads and watching movies. I didn't even have, at the time, which was really silly, I didn't have like a data plan for the phone, so I couldn't even contact anybody.
Oh no.
And then they announced something in Chinese, and I didn't understand. But then I was told that the bus wasn't going to move. The road had been closed, and we were staying there overnight. So at the end of it, I was actually there for over 24 hours on the bus. It didn't have a toilet. I hadn't prepared in terms of food or snacks or anything like that. But it did seem that the local villagers and things would probably know that this might happen, and there were roadside sellers of fruits and drinks. So I could eat. And at the time, it wasn't a great experience, let's say, but when we actually made it to the place, to Kangding, it was it's a city in like a mountainous like ridge, and it was well worth it. I could have traveled for like a week and been stuck on the bus for a week and still been happy I'd done it because it was so amazing.
Wow.
And it was kind of like a monsoon climate. So the rivers coming down from the mountain were like really strong, and it was just so different to where I'd been based already in China. So it was really amazing to see something different. But above all, it's kind of made me think, coach travel isn't that bad. Sometimes I used to think maybe an hour's journey is too long. A drive to London, say 3 hours, that's ages. But now I just think I can do anything. Really shaped the way that I've like travelled going forward as well, having that kind of memory and knowing that, things don't always go to plan, but it was a really interesting experience nonetheless.
A man after my own heart. Things don't always go to plan, but that is okay. I think that is one of the biggest lessons of travel, and it's a good lesson for life as well. Anyway, this episode has become a little bit longer than usual because I just had to share these amazing stories from the listeners. So thank you so much for indulging us. And I'm sure you'll agree that these listener stories have just been just a delightful array of different travel experiences. And it was such a pleasure to interview everyone. So to celebrate the 200th episode. And so this is the 201st episode to continue that celebration. So thank you again to Lily, Anuj, Anna, Jane, Richie and Genevieve. Really, really appreciate your contribution and really appreciate that you are fond listeners of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. So thank you very, very much. If you want to see the show notes for this episode, they will be at notaballerina.com/200. As always, don't forget to come and join our Facebook group for Thoughtful Travellers. We are at 1,000 and something, 1,015, 1,020, I'm not sure, members at the moment. Lots of great conversations there, and it would be a pleasure to have you there with us. So as always, thank you very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.